Y'all don't mind if I take this off to talk? Good evening, everyone. My name is Robin Glossner. I am the events coordinator here at the Odyssey Bookshop, and I am pleased to welcome tonight Andrea Hairston, and to talk about her historical fantasy, We'll Do Magic for Small Change. Her conversation partner is our own Bethany Powell. Thank you, Andrea, for being here, and to Bethany for being in conversation, and welcome to all of you who are here and those of you who are on Facebook. Just a few words about the bookshop. The Odyssey is open 7 days a week now for in-store browsing, Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and Sunday, 12 to 5. We have a lot of upcoming events. I'm going to just tell you about a couple of them. Join us in person next Wednesday, October 12th at 7 p.m. as Jenna Rose Nethercott presents her debut novel, Thistlefoot. The reading will be animated by hand-built, hand-cranked shadow panoramas and puppetry, created with the help of Wooly Marr and Shoshana Bass. She'll be joined in conversation by Jedediah Berry. Join us in person on Thursday, October 20th at 7 p.m. as poet Doug Anderson reads from his new collection, Undress, She Said. He'll be joined by poet Lauren Marie Schmidt. Join us live and in person on Friday, October 21st at 7 p.m. as Mount Holyoke alumna Robin McLean talks about her new collection of short stories, Get 'em Young, Treat 'em Tough, Tell 'em Nothing. She will be joined in conversation by novelist Karen Shepard. And we have a very special event coming up on Thursday, October 27th at 7 p.m. Charlene Hunter-Gault will present her new book, My People, 5 Decades of Writing About Black Lives. She'll be joined in conversation by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who is the interim president of Mount Holyoke College. This event will be held on the campus of Mount Holyoke College in Hooker Auditorium and is co-sponsored by the Mount Holyoke College of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Weissman Center for Leadership and New England Public Media. There's lots more. For more information about these events, authors, and books, visit our website at odysseybks.com. That's where you can register for all events as well as pre-order copies of the books. We also have on the chairs our monthly calendar of events. You can take it with you and put it on your refrigerator. And I'll be sending around the sign up for our weekly newsletter. Our guest author tonight is Andrea Hairston. Andrea Hairston is a novelist, essayist, playwright, and the artistic director of Chrysalis Theater. She is the author of Redwood and Wildfire, winner of the 2011 Otherwise Award and the Carl Brandon Kindred Award, and Mindscape, shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick and Otherwise Awards, and winner of the Carl Brandon Parallax Award. In her spare time, she is the Louise Wolfe Kahn 1931 Professor of Theater and Afro-American Studies at Smith College. She has received the International Association of the Fantastic in the Arts Distinguished Scholarship Award for outstanding contributions to the criticism of the fantastic. She bikes at night year-round, meeting bears and the occasional shooting star. The conversation partner is Bethany Powell. Bethany Powell is a speculative poet and a theoretical novelist. She was born in Massachusetts, but has only recently made it back to her habitat after lurking in rural towns of the West Coast, Japan, and Oklahoma. She is a bookseller at the Odyssey, overseeing the Mount Holyoke campus store and social media. About We'll Do Magic for Small Change. Andrea Hairston's historical fantasy, We'll Do Magic for Small Change, presents a tale of alien science and earthbound magic and the secrets families keep from each other. Cinnamon Jones dreams of stepping on stage and acting her heart out like her famous grandparents, Redwood and Wildfire, but she's always been theatrically challenged. That won't necessarily stop her, but her family life is a tangle of mysteries and secrets, and nobody is telling her the whole truth. So welcome, Andrea and Bethany. Thank you for being here. I don't know if you want to read right now or
Yeah. Should I read right now?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, why don't I read at the beginning?
okay.
Okay. I'm going to take off my mask.
but I'm not going to set it down so I won't lose it. Hi, good to see you all here. I'm just going to read from the very beginning of the book to give you a sense of there are two point of view characters in the book, and I'll give you a sense of each of them right from the beginning. And then I will do a poem that is from Redwood and Wildfire, who are in this book as well. And it'll be clear when I get to that part. Did someone else come in? Okay, all right. So we'll do magic for small change. What is life? It is the flash of a firefly in the night. It is the breath of a buffalo in the wintertime. It is the little shadow which runs across the grass and loses itself in the sunset. Blackfoot proverb. 1. Pittsburgh, PA, December 1984. Public display. Books let dead people talk to us from the grave. Cinnamon Jones spoke through gritted teeth, holding back tears. She gripped the leather-bound special edition chronicles her half-brother Sekou had given her before he died. It smelled of pepper and cilantro. Sekou could never get enough pepper. With gray walls, slate green curtains, olive tight-napped carpets, and a faint tang of formaldehyde clinging to everything, Johnson's funeral home might as well have been a tomb. Mourners in black and navy blue stuffed their mouths with fried chicken or guzzled coffee laced with booze. Uncle Dickie had a flask and claimed he was lifting everybody's spirits. Nobody looked droopy. Mostly good Christians, arguing whether Sekou, after such a bad boy life, would hit heaven or hell or just decay in the casket. Why did Sekou give that to you? Opal Jones, Cinnamon's mom, tugged at the chronicles. You're too young for, how do you know? You haven't read it, nobody's read it except Sekou. Cinnamon wouldn't let go. She was a big girl, taller than her 5'4" mother and 35 pounds heavier. Opal hadn't won a tug of war with her since she was 8. I'm not a baby, Cinnamon said. I'll be 13 next August. What are you saying? Opal was shivering. Books let dead people talk to us from the grave, Cinnamon shouted. Gasping, Opal let go, and Cinnamon tumbled into Mr. Johnson, the funeral director. The whole room was listening now. Opal grimaced. She hated public display. Mr. Johnson nodded. He was solemn and upright and smelled like air freshener. Opal had his deepest sympathy and a bill she couldn't pay. Dying was expensive. Why'd you bring that stupid book? Opal whispered to Cinnamon, poker face in place. Sekou says I shouldn't let it out of my sight. Cinnamon pressed her cheek against the cover, catching a whiff of Sekou's after-gym sweat. What if there was a fire at home? Opal snorted. We could collect insurance. The Chronicles, it's magic and really, truly powerful. Sekou picked that old thing up, dumpster diving in Shadyside. Opal shook her head. Dragging trash around with you everywhere won't turn it into magic. Cinnamon was losing the battle with tears. Why not? Opal's voice snagged on words that wouldn't come. She made a I can't take any more gesture and wavered against the flower fortress around Sekou's open casket. Her dark skin had a chalky overlay. The one black dress to her name had turned ash gray in the wash, but hadn't shrunk to fit her wasted form. She was as flimsy as a ghost and as bitter as an overdose. Sekou looked more alive than Opal. A half smile stuck on the face, nestled in blue satin. Cinnamon inched away from them both. Funerals were stupid. This school statue wasn't really Sekou, just dead dust in a rented pinstripe suit made up to look like him. Sekou was long gone, somewhere Cinnamon couldn't go. Not yet. How would she make it without him? Pittsburgh's a dump, sis. First chance I get, I'm out of here. Sekou said that every other day. How could he abandon her? Cinnamon brushed away an acid tear and bumped into mourners. Sekou talked a lot of trash, you hear me? Opal touched the stand-in's marble skin and stroked soft dreadlocks. When he was high, he didn't know what he was saying. Making shit up. Don't go believing him. Cinnamon chomped her bruised lower lip. The Chronicles is a special book, magic, a book to see a person through tough times. She threw open the cover. Every time before, fuzzy letters danced across the page and illustrations blurred in and out of focus. If you couldn't stop crying, reading was too hard. The pages were clear now. The letters even seemed to glow. She dove right in. Dedication to the Chronicles. The abyss beckons. You who read are guardians. For your generosity, for the risks you take to hold me to life, I offer thanks and blessings. Words are powerful medicine, a shield against further disaster. I should have written sooner. Writing might help me become whole again. I can't recall most of the 20th century, and as for the 19th, I don't know what really happened or what I wished happened or what I remember again and again as if it had happened. I write first of origins, for as the people say, cut your chains and you become free, but cut your roots and you die. Chronicles 1, Dahomey, West Africa, 1892, still point. Kehinde was fearless. And Ahosi, king's wife, warrior woman, running for her life, daring to love and honor another man above Behanzan, the king of Dahomey. She saw me come together in scummy water, tumbling over smooth boulders, my eyes drawn from rainbows, feet on fire, crystals melting into skin. Momentum carried her through the cave mouth toward me as bright green algae twisted into hair, and I sucked in foam and slime to form lungs. Even if she had wanted to run from an alien creature materializing from mist, dust, and light, there was nowhere to go. Enemy soldiers rushed past our hiding place, bellowing bloodlust. Seeing me emerge into human form, Kehinde did not scream or slow her pace, but accepted the event, an impossible vision, a dream nightmare unfolding before her as truth. Her disciplined calm eased my transition, yet nothing prepares you for the first breath, for the peculiar array of new senses or the weightiness of gravity. I was stunned by the magnetic field and the urgency of desire for food, for touch, for expression and connection. The first experiences are paradise. As I selfishly reveled in the miracles of this universe, in the delight of a new body, danger threatened at Kehinde's back. Bayonets, bullets, and 100 furious feet. She gulped the human air and glared back and forth between me and the watery entrance. Her deep brown flesh was torn and bleeding as her heart flooded bulging muscles with iron-rich, oxygen-dense blood. An unconscious man was balanced on the fulcrum of her shoulder. He bled from too many wounds onto the knives, guns, water gourds, ammunition, bedroll, food, wooden stool, palm leaf umbrella, human skulls, and medicine bags that hung from a belt at her waist. She settled the man against the damp earth. She kissed his eyes, stroked his hair, and mumbled to him. Foreign projectiles were lodged in his organs. He'd soon bleed himself away. Abandoning him would have improved her choices or her chances of survival, yet she had no intention of doing this. Kehinde's spirit appealed to me at once. My body settled on a form close to hers. She aimed a rifle at me. Later, I would learn she was a sharpshooter, Geppetto, an elephant huntress, a merciless killer of her enemies. In these first moments, I understood the murderous device, yet felt certain she would not set its lethal projectiles in motion. Too noisy. Why give herself away to harm me, a naked being just coming to my senses? She could not fathom the risk I posed. Trusting me for the moment was reasonable. I pushed her weapon aside with my still spongy cheek and bent to the suffering man. Kehinde shifted the rifle toward the cave opening and held a knife at my writhing algae hair while I ministered to him. If I knew then what I know now, I might have been able to save him. Perhaps it was better for me that I was so ignorant of human bodies. He might not have embraced the newly formed wanderer, and Kehinde might not have become my guide. Lonely wanderers fade back into the spaces between things or fracture incessantly until they are next to nothing. Kehinde, the man groaned and reached for her. Samso. I covered his mouth quickly. Kehinde dripped fragrant, salty fluid onto my face, silently urging me to act, to aid the broken man. With minor core manipulations, I eased pain, calmed turmoil, and gave them a few moments to share. The man came swiftly to his senses and gripped her calf. She thrust the rifle into my hand. I grasped it clumsily and monitored the cave mouth. I doubted my resolve or my accuracy. My bones were still gooey, my muscles rock hard. She crouched down and they passed soft sounds between them, inhaling each other's breath. She never betrayed his last words to me, yet I am certain he exhorted her to leave, to let him die with the hope that at least she had a chance to live. Kehinde shook her head, resisting his demand. The people who carried her death in their minds raced again through the water outside our cave. The man heard them and clutched a blade at her belt. Samso. Insistent, he ground his teeth and spit this word at her, a name I would later learn. The sound made my throat ache. Someone splashed close to the entrance. Kehinde's heart raced. The dying man nodded and closed his eyes. Kehinde sucked a ragged breath. Samso, she said. Her hand shook as she forced her cutlass through his heart. So that's part of the book, and that's Cinnamon. And these are her grandparents who come and to her aid, sort of actually at the beginning of the book. They actually show up at the funeral. So they come in and they're like this, they're hoodoo. And I'll explain what hoodoo is. Hoodoo is everyday conjure. Hoodoo is power to the people. From the ancestors to the unborn, we agents of change are the flesh of their spirits. Power to the people. We work the mojo. Hoodoo is improvisation, mojo, to call down the spirits, to activate insight, to conjure change. Mojo is a prayer in a bag, the power of the spirits riding close to the body. Because nobody can burn what you're holding in your heart. Nobody can turn the truth riding on your breath to ash and smoke, to pain and regret. How much you want to bet? Nobody can set the spirit on fire except with love. So those are her grandparents, and they are theater people, and they come and help her out.
It's so great to hear it in the because
Yeah.
it's set up. We didn't do tech with this, so it was great to hear you read and bring the different parts of this. You can leave it on or,
okay.
off, or keep it off if you want. There are people coming in. People think stuff. I thought that it was so interesting to be dropped into a world. First, it's like kind of the 80s is what it's labeled as, the 80s in the middle of a funeral with a big family that we don't know, and then immediately be transposed back to Kahinde's time. And then there's a narration of like so many stories and so many layers. And I was curious if you started off with that kind of like going back and forth between point of views, or if that's something that emerged as you were writing these stories.
Well, I have a hard time writing from a single point of view. I'm a playwright. So I like the juxtaposition of voices, you know, that's a play. And I like the juxtaposition of perspectives, so that no one character has the full view. The audience has the view watching the characters interact. So that's a real characteristic of theater, of a dramatic story. And so I wanted to, you know, I love different voices. And so for me, that's how I think as a writer. The story comes from the voice of a particular character. And so I did a lot of research on Dahomey, the West African country, and the women warriors of that country. I saw a photograph of these women at the Chicago World's Fair, and they appear in my other novel because I was like, oh my God, they were at the Chicago World Fair. So I definitely have to research this, but I couldn't find out anything. So when I wrote Redwood and Wildfire, they just kind of walked through. But for this book, I decided I would have to figure out how to, you know, center on them, focus on them. But one of the problems was no one talked to them. So the articles that I read in like newspapers at the time were all about what people thought of them. Then when I did research on, you know, not just the Chicago World's Fair, but on Dahomey, it was all about, you know, Europeans who came and what they had to say about those women. And then I read like 3 or 4 of the definitive books on them. And in those books, there are very few quotes from the actual women. There's a lot of talk about what they must have done, or there's Sir Richard Burton and what he thought of them and how, you know, weird they looked and how, you know, animalistic and masculine they were. There are comments by other explorers who come, and so you can read them, and I've read them in German. And I, you know, I was like, oh my God, wow, you know, the Germans like enumerate all the things they have and what they can do, but they do not talk to them. And then in America, when they're at this thing, I'm like, are those really the women? Because, you know, this is a performance at the Chicago World's Fair. And basically they were just stripped to the waist. So I mean, or is this just some Black women they got and say, put on this and look like you're, you know, there's no way I can tell, because again, they didn't talk to them. And they didn't actually look like the pictures I had seen of the warriors, right? When I looked at pictures of warriors, because they had photographs of them, and the pictures of the women at the fair, it seemed like, So I wasn't sure, you know, who they actually got to come. And they were at the edge of the World's Fair. They were sort of like, you know, you couldn't go on safari, but you could come to the World's Fair. That's how museums and fairs were operating. We can bring the world to you. So I was like, gosh, am I going to contribute to that by writing another story with these women on display, but not really getting to them? So what can I do? So that's when Kahinde, that's when the Taiwo, who's the narrator, came to me. So instead of having it be anybody from this world, I had someone from another dimension come, and they come to Dahomey, and Dahomey is the world to them. In other words, that's the center of the world. This is normal. And everything else that Taiwo experiences after that is through the lens of Dahomey is normal and Kahinde is my model. So I will try to see the world through Kahinde's eyes, failing, of course, since I'm from another dimension and don't quite get on. But that allowed me then not to have to, you know, I could speculate on what might be in Kahinde, but I was not doing this thing of writing on them. I was letting the alien go, gosh, I don't know, like this is Earth and this is a person. Okay, these are people and people do these things. So that's, and then Cinnamon gets to read that and appreciate that her brother gave it to her. So there's a lot going on. You have to read it. It's like a murder mystery. So Cinnamon gets to appreciate that, that journey. So while she's doing her struggles, Taiwo is trying to figure out how to be in this world. And the guide for him is Kahinde. This is how you are a person.
So Taiwo and Taiwo and Kehinde in Yoruba, these are the names of twins, right? So they try to figure out how to be with one another, and Taiwo tries to figure out how to be in the world, and Kehinde, figures out her relationship to being a woman warrior. The fawn of Dahomey would capture people or collect them or whatever, and then they could become a warrior woman. So Kehinde is a Yoruba woman who is in the fighting women, because they were made up of women from various groups in West Africa. And the fawn, you could do that. You could be a slave or you could be a soldier. And a lot of women went, well, I'll do this one.
Yeah.
And then become, the wives of the king, which is basically advisor, warrior, and even rainmate, like helping you rule. So it was a very interesting society. So I was able to use all that, but have it come through an alien.
I think did you know when this was going to be released that there was going to be the Woman King movie coming out?
No, I did not. I had no, and I had a conversation with Viola Davis when she was at Smith. I interviewed her in I don't know, when was that, 2016, about the Dahomey women at the time, but I didn't realize that she was interested in doing this film, or when it would come out. And my book had just come out in 2016. So,
right.
And so then it was being reissued now, and
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was going to happen simultaneously.
I was trying to figure out if that was deep thinking on the part of tour.com. Or...
No. It was really this happened abruptly, that this was even going to come out this year. So, none of it was planned. It just is coincidence.
That's fascinating, because I saw a TikTok that was basically talking about why Lupita Nyong'o dropped out of that film, because she went to do a documentary on the warrior women and realized that it was much more complicated and nuanced, and that really, and then I start reading this book and I'm like, oh, this actually really shows the complicated nature, because Kehinde is one of these women who is stolen.
I have sort of stayed away from some of the debate, because I don't enjoy those debates. But I was like, oh, they based it on that character and they left out this other part. So, ouch. So, I mean, these are child soldiers. These are stolen women.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the women are also like, my daughter is, too much to handle. So you go marry the king. So, or I want to have favor with the king, so I'll give you my daughter. Or I'm running away from a horrible man, I'll marry you now. So it was a really messy, intense situation, but it allowed for social, you could know you were nobody was above you, only the king was above you. So the warrior women, the king, and then everybody else. So it gave you a position that if you started off in a lower position, now you didn't have to marry someone, and women who weren't the warrior women didn't have great status in Dahomey. So, but the warrior women had amazing status. And like I said, you could be rainmate. If you were the general of the generals, the king didn't trust the guys. But you owed everything to him, so he trusted you. So I haven't seen this film. I plan to go see it at some point. So I'm not claiming to do history, but I think I've done more historical. I paid attention to the complexities of the history more than perhaps the film does. That's my impression.
Well, before we started, we were talking about kind of the way that there's this idea of kind of an objective reality and realism as real. And then that's kind of the trap that this movie has apparently fallen into. We have to have heroes and they have to follow this narrative. I don't, the women are not any more heroic than anybody else. I mean, they are warrior women. So it's about what they do, but they aren't heroes because they are warrior women, or because they can pick up spears, or because they can hack off heads. In fact, there's a character in the piece who trains the young
women and makes them into killing machines, right? So I address that and tries to break their spirits and use their vulnerabilities and, and drugs and, sensory deprivation and all the things you use to create a warrior out of a child. Has done that and says, and once I have done that to you, you cannot get away from that. You are always that. You are always mine. So, and that's a fawn woman, and that's what they would have been doing. I mean, I read descriptions of the training process, and it was like, oh my God. Back to the king. The king had a whole group of very powerful women around him, and not all of them warrior women. So he also had advisors, and they didn't necessarily have to go through this. But it was a very hierarchical society, and status was who you had power over. And so the warrior women had more power than some of the other advisors. I mean, partially because they, you want to offer them a lot. Okay, you go risk your lives, and then we'll give you all this status. So, and I think it's important to bring that up, and have that, not pretend that you have some magical community where now they're Black, but they're heroic because they're warriors and they're women. I mean, really, who are they? And what are their, to me, what are their contradictions? That's what I'm interested in as a playwright. What are the contradictions? Like, there's a lot of stuff to admire and be like, ooh, and they were really amazing women, and they had like a vast knowledge of all the things that needed to be done to run a country. So the Europeans didn't quite understand, like, wow, why are these women running everything? Because they didn't necessarily have that notion that their women could do it, even though the women had done it. So I don't know what was wrong with them, but whatever. They're just like, oh, these women could do all this stuff, and your women ain't. What? No. But so the whole that is amazing, and that we often think women haven't done these things, or we have like blank spots in our history we don't understand, and yet we also can't just, like, I don't know, okay, I'm not going to talk about all that, and I'm going to pretend that the story is this other thing. So I wasn't really interested in that. I mean, that's not what I was trying to get at. My question was, who were the women performing at the Chicago World's Fair? Who might they have been? It's a speculative question. And since I didn't know who they were, my group doesn't quite end up at the Chicago World's Fair, so you'll find out what happens. But I wanted to know, who might they have been? So that's my question. And therefore I had to investigate the whole situation. Cinnamon is fortified by a frank discussion of history, of contradiction, of question. Something that I teach a class, and Ursula Gwynn talks about how what we're really interested in is not the answer, but the questions. So how can we raise questions about like what we take for granted? Like, we think it's great, women warriors, yay! Well, what are the other possibilities of looking at that? And why do we want women warriors? And how do we just think that that's like, we shift from, oh, women can't do it, to, oh, women can do it just like the men, and that makes them equal to what? I mean, do you want to be equal to that? I mean, what, so I want to ask questions about all that. And that's partly what I'm trying to do in the book. And for Cinnamon to investigate it as a young person who's looking for, well, I mean, she's at a funeral with her very weird family. I cut that chapter a little short. There's more that goes on. And I mean, it's just a regular weird family, with all the weird people that you have in your family who are at the funeral. And, she really misses her brother, and she and her mother don't get on as well as she would like. So this book becomes very fascinating. And so she can just, and it's magical, as she says, so she can jump into it.
Yeah. Her mother is also very complicated, I feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A complicated character. Yeah.
So you, I think I'm so glad to hear that you're like filtering it through the alien, because you are doing this act of like speculation about people, and you don't want to get into the head of someone that you actually can't know. So, but I would
Yeah.
love to hear more about kind of what you see as the way that fantasy can grapple with those questions or ask more of those questions. And
Well, for me, since I'm doing the impossible, it problematizes whatever story I tell, right? So this is an alien view of these women. So we're, Brecht would call it a Verfremdungseffect. It's a distancing effect. So there's no way that I can, that the Taiwo is going to give you the absolute objective view of these characters. We are suddenly aware that, oh, views are skewed because the alien is definitely skewed. And then you don't have access to, except through that perception, this historical period. And that to me is like, we're all aliens in that sense. So that's one of the things that I like about fantasy, that you have to do this work from self to other. You have to, Anna Devere Smith says that's what acting is. It's a bridge from self to other. So you have to work to get yourself to that. It's not just that you look in yourself for like, I will find an emotion that's similar to the emotion of you may not have an emotion similar to the emotion of the character, or you have no experience, you have no contact, but you can do the work still to get from yourself to the other. So that's what I think fantasy allows us to do, because you familiarize what we take for granted, that there is this subjective reality that can be, behind a fourth wall and we are just peeking in. Like, oh, wow, we're peeking in, but like it's a view screen, with a like a lens that's torqued. And what I'm seeing are, from multiple perspectives, so I get like different information, is partial. So that there are still questions. It's not like this is how those women were. This is how those women might have been from the point of view of Taiwo,
who is sharing this story with like Sekou and Cinnamon.
Yes.
And then also you have the whole fact that this is filtered through Cinnamon's, like
right.
The 80s are being filtered through Cinnamon's point of view as a teenager.
Right.
Who is also a very skewed lens.
Yeah, right. So I want that. And that to me is what character is, like, as that when so for me, I like to do the work that Anna Devere Smith talks about almost as an actor. As a writer, I want to do the work of going from self to other, and then let the character speak, right? So then the character speaks. So after a while, I could just get into character and write from, okay, now I'm Taiwo. Okay, great. Oh, then I'd have to read Taiwo over and over again to like remember, like, oh my God, like wait, no, Taiwo would never say that. In fact, Taiwo's like arguing with me now. That's not me, that's you. Get out. So I'd have to do that work to stay clear on the frame. And then of course, Taiwo's a griot, so a storyteller collecting stories. So Taiwo lets the other characters tell stories and puts those in too. So we get like a lot of different stories about the world, so that I am able to bring in, sort of more voices, more points of view, so that, the world is then, we're able to grasp it better. Even if we still don't quite know what's going on, we have a sense of what might be going on. So.
And I'm curious about, it feels like all of those voices there in the book, it might be something that you can only do through a novel rather than a screenplay, to kind of go through so many voices. Or
it would have to be a long form television show, not a, the thing, I write screenplays, and the thing about a screenplay is a short story is a good, maybe a novella, but I find like people who try to stuff their whole novel into a screenplay, just the amount of story isn't working. So there's much more story that you can do in a novel. So that's why I think long form television, which I think has really, developed in the last, 20 years, is really excellent for longer you know, longer pieces like something like this. I did write a screenplay for Redwood and Wildfire, the earlier book, and then I turned that screenplay into a novel. So I'm not sure the novel can now go back to the screenplay because I had to fill in things, you know, that, you know, were like, wait, what is this? Oh no, you got to go back and figure that out. So it might also need to be now long form television, but I think that would be where something like this would work.
Yeah, and this ties back to that
Yeah.
book. To
Even
an
though it
extent.
stands alone, so you don't
Yeah.
need that other book to read this one.
Yeah.
You know, so you get a different experience if you read this and then go back and read that. I think someone is reading, I have a new book coming out probably next year, and someone read that who had never read anything because I wanted to check that. And then she decided, I'm going to go back and read Redwood and Wildfire. So she's now going back and, you know, starting at the beginning of the world that I've tried to create.
I saw that one of the questions that you had for that book was that you also kind of, it sounds like you had to interact with in that like speculative way, was about performers in the era. And I was really curious what kind of, because I'm sure you did research and, you know, then you ended up doing stories.
Yeah, I tried not to write the book because I thought I didn't know enough about, the book takes place in the turn of the 20th century, the 1890s to like World War I, right? And I thought, I can't do that. So I tried not to write it, but I taught a class on minstrel shows and Wild West shows, and looked at the impact of that period on the 20th century theater. So I looked at those, actually I looked at theater from like 1820s when minstrel shows starts, all the way to the 1950s when you have basically African-American playwrights writing their own scripts in you know, large numbers. So I just wanted to see what was going on with theater and what impact did it have on other art forms. So, you know, it's great to be a professor. You can decide, I'm going to research that. Oh, I'm going to teach a class on that. I'm going to have all my students research that. Oh, great. You research that and you do a paper and you can do, okay, bring it to class. Oh, like it. So I got to read. So I taught that class for several years. And basically the final projects, everybody had to go and do research. Woo, hey. So, and then I had to be up on all the research they were doing, right? So it was really structured, you know, investigation of the time period, of the things that happened, of the ramifications in contemporary work. Like, do we see this same image come through like from 1820 to 1990 something? I mean, literally we looked at, like, I think it was Rush Hour, which was Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, right? And, you know, and we looked at how they perform as Asian and African American is similar to performances in the 19th century, you know, the kinds of things that they're doing. You know, and one can sit in the audience and not know that, you know, that this is a continuum. So it was very interesting to me to do all that research. And then I even had a research assistant because we were just looking at material culture. So we were looking at Sears and Roebuck's catalogs and clothing and women's clothing. So I got to do all kinds of very interesting research. And then I loved reading diaries and, you know, first person journals, because then you get inside someone's character, which I couldn't do as much for this, but I still couldn't find, I could find journals from the time or letters that some of the actors wrote, but the women again are ignored. So it's hard to find interviews with the women, like, what are you doing acting like that? What did you think of being in that play? So Ada Overton Walker, who's a wonderful performer from the time, she's, you know, amazing performer. She does Salome, she's on Broadway in some of the first things we call musicals. And she writes letters, but no one talked to her. But she, you know, expresses herself in her letters. So that was great. I got to read her letters. And I think I quote one of her letters in Redwood and Wildfire. I use it as the beginning of a chapter because she was amazing. So I got to do that. And it was, you know, like, okay, so now you really do know a lot. What's your problem? But I felt like how can I do that journey from self to other? And so I had to imagine, I went, okay, you can do this. You can do this one. This isn't as far away as Dahomey. Come on. So I used my grandparents as models because I did know them, right? And my great aunt. So I used my grandfather and my great aunt. And then it was really easy because I had their voices in my head. And then it was like, oh, okay. They weren't necessarily performers, but they are from the time that I'm talking about. So, and I really knew them. And I was like, oh, and they started speaking to me, telling me to write that book, which they would have told me even before I did all the research. So that allowed me to just go for it with them.
Yeah. I think it's funny because there's almost a continuity then into this book where things are happening in the theater for Cinnamon, and that's where she's finding her people.
Yeah.
Similarly, and some of it feels kind of like it just happens by happenstance, almost the way that Taiwo emerges in a cave that just happens to be the one that Kehinde is in.
Yes.
So I'm curious what made you place it in the theater, though I feel like that's a pretty obvious question because it's
what made me place it in the theater.
Why is Cinnamon in the theater?
Wow. Well, I spent a lot of time in the theater. And I know, so I for this book I talked to a lot of my students who grew up I'm from Pittsburgh and I grew up in the 50s, but this book is Pittsburgh in the 80s. So I went and talked to a lot of people I knew who grew up at that time. Some of them were my students. In fact, I named one of the characters, and I thank Marie Masuda, who I named a character for, and she was a student of mine at Smith College, and she grew up in the 80s. So I talked to a whole range of people. I talked to a couple of professors who grew up in the 80s. They were all very generous. I said, hi, would you talk to me about what it was like growing up in the 80s? Because I wasn't in Pittsburgh in the 80s. I didn't know anything about it. I grew up in the 50s. It's a very different field, different time, different stuff. And I think since I was focused on the Dahomean women who were performing at the Chicago World's Fair, I was interested in performance. What does it mean to perform yourself? They were performing themselves, which is kind of a bizarre act. But what is performance about? Which is something I was also asking in Redwood and Wildfire. So I still think that's an exhausting question. So I still wanted to ask it here. And Cinnamon's also a scientist. So I'm very interested in the connection between thinking about the world in terms of wisdom you get that is anointed as science and wisdom that one might call superstitious, because whenever I talk about indigenous wisdom, people come back at me with the notion of superstition, because after the Enlightenment, only those who are enlightened have any wisdom almost. So it's very strange. You can go from the Greeks to the geeks, but you can't talk about other ancestral wisdom. And the Greeks, codified their scientific wisdom, but I don't know, the Potawatomi really knew how to take care of the land and survive, and not do unsustainable practices, and so survive many things that we're like floundering in. So it's just very interesting what wisdom we decide is valuable. So that's another thing I wanted to get at. So she's a scientist, and I think in the arts there's a great deal of wisdom about the world that we often don't value. So I wanted to get at the wisdom of theater, the wisdom of indigenous wisdom. Cinnamon's grandparents, one of them is from the Gullah Islands off of Georgia and the Carolinas, and another grandparent is Irish and Seminoles. So she's got a lot of different, interesting, historical, wonderful wisdom to deal with, as well as she does physics. So all of that is, to me, really important. But the place that I have found it working in concert is in the theater, right? That all of that stuff comes together in the theater. So for me, it's one of the best places to investigate how multiple threads and traditions and things come together, because that's almost the definition of theater. It's like, you know, theater takes chaos and makes cosmology, right? That's one of the functions of theater. So like, I will select these 5 things and you will understand the world, therefore, from those selections. And so I really like that about the theater. So that's, you know, why I've written the next book, Archangels of Funk, is in a near future book about someone putting on a festival, Cinnamon putting on a festival. So.
What kinds of things are you having to research for that book?
Oh, well, I have circus bots. And I did research on, I have a long-term research project on coding artificial intelligence, you know, so-called. What algorithms, how they work, how they affect us, you know, are they neutral? We have a notion that somehow they're going to be neutral. Yeah, no, people actually think algorithms are more neutral than people, right? Of course, the algorithm is no more neutral than the person who wrote it, but whatever. But we don't think of, you know, we think of math, you know, numbers speak for themselves. No number speaks for itself, right? And all numbers are part of narratives. So it's, you know, so I did a lot of research on like, yeah, the deception we have, the illusion that numbers are objective, right? So, and you know, I was a mathematician as a young person. So it's interesting to me that you need at least 4 numbers to tell your position in space, right? You need time, and then, you know, the 3 dimensions. You need 1 number for IQ. You already know that there's something wrong there if you need 4 numbers just to say where you are right now, right? And if you want to talk about where you've been and where, you know, like for any length of time, you need a whole lot more numbers. And you'd have to map it out. And then, you know, so it is interesting to me that we think we can distill such complex things into single numbers. That tells me the people who think that are not necessarily mathematicians, right? Because mathematicians kind of appreciate how that's really shaky, right? I mean, like I said, 4 numbers to say, you know, and since we're moving, that number becomes false pretty quickly, right? We're always moving, we're always in motion. So even as you do it, you're wrong, right? You're talking about the past. You know, so since I did physics and math, that is really clear to me, like, wow. So I'm always suspicious of numbers will speak for themselves.
Right.
And so, you know, whereas theater to me is really about taking chaos and making cosmology. So you're clear that you are selecting things and constructing something, and then trying to have a way of being in the, you know, cosmology, a way of proceeding and thinking that could change, but this will work for now. So it's a, you know, to me, like a wonderful place to investigate things like, you know, circus bots.
So when you say it very like we know what it means, but
Oh, okay, sorry.
No. I want to hear more about taking chaos and creating a cosmology. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, meaning isn't out there, right? Meaning is a performance. You know, so you have an experience, or you notice something, you select things, and in order to assign meaning to it, you actually have to do a performance. You have to say, I'm going to select these things and put them together, you know, or you do like the work of a metaphor. The eye is like a camera, right? So I've just given you a way, or the camera is like an eye. We'll go the other way. The camera is like an eye. So you have something you don't understand. You know, that's the target. This is the work from self to other, right? So there's I don't understand that. I understand this. This will be a bridge to that. And that is like a performance of meaning. So I can explain something to you by giving you a not so good bridge, but the bridge gives you a little bit of insight, and the insight is the cosmology. Oh, so the camera shares things with the eye, but at some point we hopefully know that's going to break down, right? There's going to be some ways that the camera isn't like an eye, or the eye isn't like a camera, or whatever. All stories do that. The story kind of explains things, uses metaphors, uses all of those wonderful self to other journeys, so that you who have never experienced what I've experienced have an insight about it, right? Whereas if I look out in the world, it's utterly chaotic. How can I explain all of that? But I can tell you a story about my trip to Bavaria, when I was on a mountain and they gave me a pretzel, and the people like loved it that I could speak German, and it was wonderful. And I could tell you all those things in a story, and you could feel like you were there, as opposed to the chaos of like, what, it's a huge, enormous country. There are all of these possibilities, but I can give you a moment of insight. And that's out of there's an infinite number of things, but a story performed explains those things, and gives you also perhaps my love of the Alps, the mountains, and the soft pretzel, so that you could taste it in your mouth and think, oh, right, this is how Germany tastes. See, I can make a whole nation into a taste, into a soft, warm pretzel with cheese, and I scrape off the salt. Right? Okay, so that's my view. That's one of my impressions of Germany. So that to me is like me performing my relationship to something, and that's all about, to me, performance. So only when I tell the story does my meaning come clear, and then you and I like share this moment of like, you can almost taste the pretzel in your mouth, yay! And then we're together in making what is essentially an infinite chaotic universe into something meaningful. And cosmology is meaning. It's not, it's not the cosmos, it's cosmology. It's, a sense of the cosmos.
I think one of the things I love about fantasy is that it does knock out some of the associations that you're used to following.
Yes.
And starts fresh. And one of the things that happens was I was reading this, and I have very, very small knowledge of the West African religions that are being represented. And so when I jump in here, I'm accepting the Wanderer, I'm accepting all of the deities that are being invoked, and also cinnamon in a part of the world in a time when I wasn't perceiving.
Right.
But I'm accepting all of those things on faith.
Yeah, well, the past is it might as well be another planet, right? You have to make but we have to go there, and get there. And so, and I love that journey. I mean, I love like British costume dramas, right? I'm a big fan of Downton Abbey, and I can feel the clothes and the food and and I love watching the melodrama and and the excitement and stuff. And so I like that experience. So that's a realist piece, but it's the same kind of journey. So I like making that journey.
The world building between historical fiction and fantasy and science fiction feels like very similar processes.
Yeah, right. They overlapped. Yeah.
Though people don't. I think, the amount of imagination that goes into historical fiction, it might surprise people who aren't thinking about how much it is.
Right. I mean, because all the historical details that I use, I don't. I wrote another novel of the Master of Poisons. I invent a whole world, and there's nothing, I mean, it relates to our world, but it's not our world. I mentioned all kinds of historical events and things that were happening, and those are all like from my historical research. Like from, oh, this was in the newspaper. Oh, this was like, oh, that film came out that year. Oh, this was over there. Oh, this event happened. People were doing these things. So I can use that. The same kind of research that you do when you do like a realist historical novel. I use that as well. And I did that for Dahomey too. The big sort of Verfremdungseffect is the alien. So I have an alien in Dahomey. And, aliens usually come to, I don't know, New York or London or, I don't know, Tokyo. But I said, no, you're going to come to outside of Ouida in Dahomey in the 1890s. Boom. So that was, and I enjoyed that idea. So I also liked the fantasy of it, the fancifulness of it. And that playfulness is also something that I think I like about fantasy, that it's about letting the mind play. And we like that.
Yeah. but still are, you know, experiencing the familiar despair of being at a funeral and gripping, you know, trying to understand someone you fundamentally can't understand.
Right.
And yeah.
And deal with loss.
Yeah. Was there anything that I should have asked you about that I didn't ask you about?
No? Did anybody have
Yeah,
a
any
question
questions
or
here?
something they wanted to ask?
I think you touched into sort of my curiosity about it's clear you put in a lot of research and then the world building that you put on top of that research. I don't know, is there anything else, any particular piece of something that came purely out of your imagination that you feel like proud of? It's, I guess, not a spoiler, but
Oh, well, all the stuff with the alien. I mean, the alien is just, and the capacities of the alien, and then figuring out, like, because I had to do a whole, like, who is this alien? Where are they from? What is their mission? Like, what are their emotional ranges? What are their physical capacities? So I really enjoyed I think I read to you the alien coming into being, you know, that whole thing. I had to figure that out. And so, and it became like, wow. So I had to see it, you know, like, ooh, oh, what's that? You know, like, how would, you know, oh, okay, you could use that for long. Oh, but okay. So I liked, and all the times the alien experiences the world, I loved the mix of science and fantasy. That I think is, you know, and then science beyond ours would seem like magic, right? So the Arthur C. Clarke notion. So you know, I like liminal fantasy. So, you know, all of this could be because the alien's capacities are not like ours. And could be actual or whatever. That doesn't matter to me, but I like being on the line. So, you know, and I liked having ghosts too, because I have ghosts and aliens as well as, you know, physics, you know, so I liked the mix of, so I, you know, Tor calls it a historical fantasy. That's actually not, I let them say that, they say that. Okay, but that's not how.
Pigeonhole to put it into.
Yeah, like, oh, okay, but you know, I think what I like is that it, you know, I wanted to make sure that all of those elements work together and don't contradict each other. So that's one of the things that I actually feel proud about. So I don't know, when you get toward the end, Cinnamon has to deal with, like, how can you believe in hoodoo and voodoo and science? So I asked that question and I have her come up with an answer. Yay, Cinnamon. So she comes up with an answer that is actually a reasonable answer and doesn't betray any of the things she believes in. And that to me is one of that was like, wow, because I asked myself that question. So I the author said, how is she going to do this? Okay, right. So I had to write until she did it. And it's near the end of the book that she does it.
One other thing, do they let you do your own audiobooks?
Oh,
They
no. They did, they got someone else to do the audiobook. No, I don't think I could do my own audiobook. I think it would, you know, I mean, I love reading like a little part, but to do the entire book, woo, yeah, you have to like act. I'm not actually, I mean, I can act, I do know how to act, but I think actors love doing it and have much more stamina for the things I know how to do, because I do know how to do all those acting things and I can do them. So when I do a reading, I use all the knowledge I have of acting to do it, but to actually do a whole book is like doing a whole play or something, and that requires a lot of stamina, skill and passion and nuance that I would have to work at. And I actually want to write my next book.
Fair.
I have one more question, which is, you know, this book was released before. What is it like to be coming out and doing readings of it again? And
well, I feel really grateful again that the book is out, and because it was on a very small press. So even though it got, like, you know, the New York Times said it was great, and it was on a whole lot of best this lists, it, you know, and it actually, because of the Times, it actually sold a little more than other books I had. But a lot of people didn't even know about it because there was no distribution. There was no like, whereas now Tor can just like blast everybody and send it out and, send out and then, do great covers. And I just got, it's on a bunch of like, read this book lists. They have the capacity to get it in front of people. So I feel really blessed that it's coming out. And secondly, I'm a theater person, so we don't mind. Like I realized, I just rehearsed it. I did it. I got up and I went, oh, I know the script. And so, you as an actor, this is where being an actor is helpful. You come back to a script and I'm like, wow, I like this. Oh, that's a good line. So I just worked it as like, I haven't done this role for a while, where I play this character. What can I add to it now? And the theater, you do repeat things, but they're not the same. So you bring like, here I am in 2022 as opposed to 2016, and reading the book, I was like, oh my God, so many things still resonate with right now. So that was really interesting. So
could I just echo, I think both of you mentioned it, you did great reading, and I almost had that kind of theatrical where it was lights out on that first scene of the funeral, and then lights up on the next thing that was happening. And so I definitely picked up on that. I'm sort of new to speculative fiction, and I find sometimes like, and sometimes I dive, in there, and almost like some of the bestsellers, I felt like, it's sort of just done. So I'm just wondering, especially since they call it historical fantasy, and you're mentioning speculative fiction and things like that. I'm trying to figure out, am I the target audience for this? Who is the target audience? And out of that, sort of like,
for my book or for
your book,
yeah.
And out of that, I'm trying to hold on, just in this very brief reading, to so much the alien and the historical piece and the 1980s funeral. So I don't have a lot to go on yet, but I just wonder, like, did that come fully formed, that those were like the three pieces that were going to be your constellation that you're working with, or did you
I wanted
others
to
and pick it in, and decide?
I wait. What I do is I want to tell a story about Dahomean women, and I'll research, I'll do this, and I want to tell a story about cinnamon. Okay, all right. And then I wait, because I actually trust the cognitive unconscious. Like I just drop in a lot of stuff. Here's more stuff. Oh, go watch that. Go see this. This is what I can do. So actually the funeral is what pulled it all together, because I was in Seattle trying to figure out this book. I went to my wife's brother's house in Seattle, and I was in like a garden house, and it was beautiful out, and I was just trying to figure out, what is this book about? And then I realized that her brother had died, right? Her brother had died, and he gave her this book, and the book is about this alien who went to Dahomey, and that's how I can, and it's all about their whole family. And then the alien, there's a moment in Redwood and Wildfire where Redwood and Wildfire come across people from Dahomey, and that moment will be in this book. So that moment's in this book, so, and so that's how you'll bring it all together. Now go to work. So so really it was about what is the family mystery that then I can use the story of the Dahomean women to tell. So the family story. So for me, it's really about Cinnamon dealing with loss. Her father is in a coma because he, was in a bar and got shot. Her brother, overdosed purposefully, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. Why did that happen? And her mother, of course, is freaked out by all of that, but isn't telling her because she's 12. Nobody's telling her, and she's pissed. And so she runs to the theater to try to, okay, I'll do this theater stuff. But meanwhile, there's this whole cloud over her. So I think I'm really interested in the character relationships, not so much in like aliens, but the alien offers me a way to the interior of people that I have no access to. So to me, I don't just do a gimmick. It has to be integral or organic to the story I'm telling. So the alien is an embodiment of all of us who would like to know, who are actually from this time. And we just appear in the lives of, so I literalize what I'm actually doing, and I make it a character. I'm searching for your story, literally. I want to know, who are these women? Why don't I know anything about them? La, la, la. And then that's what Taiwo does. Who are these women? I don't know anything about them. I have to do the research. I will go to these places and experience them. So it gave me a way to do that. And in terms of who's my target audience, and I tell my writing students that you should have someone in mind when you're writing. I know my agent would, well, no, he's totally on my side. So, yeah, right. So I'm actually, writing for people who want to have an experience of the world that is recovered, a world that you may not have seen before, that is like, kind of shimmering, around the world that we're in. I think it's Paul Eluard said there's another world and it's in this one. So I want to write for people who want to see that world over there that is really right there. But I can't quite see it. I don't have the frame for it. And so I want to bring that world, not like go to the World's Fair and see the Dahomey women on display as a spectacle, but actually let's look at who they might have been. So I want to offer that. I think that's who my audience is, people who want to see that other world. And that's where I connect to science fiction and fantasy. Audiences, or some people call my work literary science fiction and fantasy, which I find aggravating. Because all of fiction is fantasy and all of it is genre, because we all need to know the protocols of reading, right? So, if you're going to read a mystery, you know what to expect as you pick up the book. I can teach it to you as you read the book, since this could be your first mystery. But generally speaking, there are things that will happen in a mystery, or that will happen in a romance, or that will happen, so that, all of those protocols, I want to be mindful of as I write my book, and how can I engage a reader who is familiar with some of those. So, yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, that seems like a really great place to leave it. Andrea?
Yeah.
Bethany?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Is this book available